The day I received a $75 fine for an unsightly fuel tank visible from the street was the day I learned exactly how petty the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association could be. And honestly, I should have seen it coming after living in suburban Phoenix, Arizona for 3 years. My name is Fletcher, and I'm a mechanical engineer who works from home most days, which means I have the unfortunate privilege of being around when the HOA president, Patricia Henderson, makes her rounds through our neighborhood like some kind of suburban dictator. The fuel tank in question was a perfectly legal, code-compliant propane tank that sat beside my garage. It was maybe 3 feet tall, painted standard industrial gray, and partially obscured by a desert willow tree I had planted specifically to hide it. But apparently, that wasn't good enough for Patricia and her band of rule-obsessed zealots. I was in my garage working on my project car, a 1967 Mustang that I had been restoring for the past 2 years, when I heard the telltale click of high heels on my driveway. I knew that sound. It was Patricia's signature power walk, the one she used when she was about to ruin someone's day. I wiped the grease off my hands and stepped out into the blazing Arizona sun, squinting at the woman who stood there with her clipboard and her phone, taking pictures of my property like she was documenting a crime scene. "Can I help you, Patricia?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She looked up from her phone, her perfectly styled blonde bob not moving an inch despite the dry wind that was kicking up dust around us. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and her expression was one of barely concealed disgust as she gestured toward my propane tank. "Lucas, this is completely unacceptable. According to Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA guidelines, all utility equipment must be completely screened from street view. This monstrosity is visible from the sidewalk, and I've already received 3 complaints from neighbors about it." I glanced at the tank, then back at her. "Patricia, that tree is going to fill in more as it grows. Right now it covers most of the tank, and besides, the tank is required for my backup generator. We talked about this when I had it installed 2 years ago, and you approved it. That was before we amended the guidelines last year. All homeowners were sent copies of the new regulations. Ignorance of the rules is not an excuse, Lucas." She tapped something on her phone, and within seconds, my phone buzzed in my pocket. "I've just sent you the official notice of violation and the associated fine. You have 30 days to remedy the situation or face additional penalties." I pulled out my phone and stared at the email. $75 for a first offense, with escalating fines of $150 per week if the violation wasn't corrected. The attachment showed photos of my tank from 3 different angles, along with a highlighted section of the HOA rules that had apparently been added in a meeting I had never been notified about. "This is ridiculous," I said, but Patricia was already walking away, her heels clicking back down my driveway like a metronome counting down to my doom. I stood there for a long moment, feeling my blood pressure rise. This wasn't the first time Patricia had targeted me with frivolous complaints. 6 months ago, it was my mailbox being 2 inches too far to the left. Before that, she had claimed my outdoor light fixtures weren't the approved shade of bronze. I had complied with every single demand, paying fines and making changes that cost me time and money, but this was different. This felt personal. I spent the rest of the afternoon researching HOA laws in Arizona, falling down a rabbit hole of statutes and regulations that made my head spin. What I learned was both encouraging and infuriating. While HOAs had significant power to enforce their rules, they also had to follow certain legal requirements. The amendment Patricia mentioned should have been voted on by the community, and all homeowners should have been properly notified with at least 14 days' notice before any vote. I had never received any such notice. That evening, I drove over to my neighbor's house. Tom Richardson was a retired lawyer who had lived in Sunset Ridge since the development was first built 15 years ago. He answered the door in shorts and a Hawaiian shirt, a beer in his hand and a smile on his weathered face. "Lucas, come on in, I just put some burgers on the grill. You eating?" "Thanks, Tom, but I just need to pick your brain about something." I showed him the violation notice on my phone and explained the situation. Tom's smile faded as he read through the email. "Did you get any notice about this rule change?" "Not that I remember. I got the original HOA packet when I bought the house, but nothing since then except violation notices." Tom set his beer down and gestured for me to follow him inside. His home office was cluttered with papers and file boxes, but he knew exactly where to look. He pulled out a thick binder labeled HOA Documents and flipped through it. "Here's the problem, Lucas. According to the bylaws, any amendment to the guidelines requires a notice to all homeowners at least 30 days before a vote. Then there needs to be a quorum at the meeting where the vote takes place. Did you get anything like that?" "Nothing. I check my mail every day." I would have remembered something like that. Tom frowned and pulled out his reading glasses. "Let me look at something." He spent several minutes comparing documents, his frown deepening. "This is interesting. According to my records, there was no general meeting called last year. Patricia called one special meeting in March, but it was supposedly about landscape maintenance contracts, and I attended that one myself. There was no discussion of rule changes. So she just made up this rule. It looks that way. Or she had a meeting without proper notice and pushed through changes that aren't actually valid. Either way, you have grounds to challenge this." I felt a surge of vindication, but it was tempered by the knowledge that fighting the HOA would be a headache. "What are my options?" "You can request a hearing before the HOA board. If that doesn't work, you can file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate since they oversee HOA disputes. Or you could just pay the fine and build a bigger screen for the tank." Tom shrugged. "But between you and me, someone needs to stand up to Patricia. She's been running this neighborhood like her personal fiefdom for too long." I thanked Tom for his help and headed home, my mind churning with possibilities. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Patricia's car parked 3 houses down, probably delivering more violation notices to some other unsuspecting homeowner. That's when the idea hit me. If Patricia wanted to make an issue out of my propane tank, I would give her an issue. But I would do it in a way that was completely legal and would drive her absolutely crazy. I spent that entire night researching and planning. By 3 in the morning, I had a complete strategy mapped out, and I was grinning like an idiot as I finally fell asleep on my couch, my laptop still open beside me. The next morning, I started making phone calls. The first was to an artist friend of mine named Miguel Santos, who did custom murals and installations around Phoenix. I explained what I wanted, and after he stopped laughing, he agreed to help me. "Man, this is either brilliant or insane, but I love it. When do you want me to start?" "As soon as possible. I have 30 days before the fines start piling up, but I want this done in 2 weeks. "I can do that. Let me draw up some concepts and I'll email them to you by tomorrow." My next call was to the Maricopa County Zoning Office. I needed to make sure that what I was planning wouldn't violate any actual laws, as opposed to made-up HOA rules. The woman I spoke with was helpful and surprisingly enthusiastic about my project. "So you want to turn the propane tank into a public art installation?" "Exactly. It would still function as a propane tank, but it would be decorated in a way that's visible from the street. I want to make sure I'm not breaking any real regulations. She put me on hold for a few minutes, and I could hear her discussing my request with someone else in the office. When she came back, she sounded amused. "Mr. Fletcher, as long as the tank itself remains up to code and you're not blocking any sightlines for traffic, you can decorate it however you want. It's your property. Just make sure any signage you add doesn't violate billboard restrictions." What about foot traffic? If people want to come look at it, that's not a zoning issue as long as they're on public sidewalks or your property with your permission. You might want to check with the city about whether you need any permits if you're planning to have large groups, but for normal pedestrian traffic, you're fine. I thanked her and hung up, feeling more confident about my plan. I spent the rest of the day making more calls and sending emails. I contacted local media outlets, pitching them a story about a homeowner standing up to HOA overreach through art. 3 of them responded with interest. I reached out to photographers and travel bloggers. I even contacted the Arizona Office of Tourism to let them know about the unique attraction that would soon be available in suburban Phoenix. Miguel sent me his concept drawings the next day, and they were perfect. He had designed a series of murals that would transform my boring gray propane tank into a miniature replica of the Grand Canyon at sunset, complete with detailed rock formations and a tiny painted river running through the bottom. But that wasn't all. He had also designed an informational placard that would explain the art installation and include a QR code linking to a website about HOA reform in Arizona. "This is incredible, Miguel. How much is this going to cost me? For you, and for the story I'm going to get out of this?" $2,000 for materials and my time, but I want full permission to document the process and share it on social media. "Deal. When can you start?" "How about Saturday? That gives me time to get all my supplies together." I agreed, and we set up a schedule. Miguel would work on the tank over the course of a week, weather permitting. While he did that, I would handle the marketing and media aspects of the project. Saturday morning arrived with typical Arizona sunshine, and Miguel showed up at 8 with his truck full of supplies. I had spent the previous evening pressure washing the propane tank and prepping the surface according to his instructions. Several neighbors came out to watch as Miguel set up his equipment and started sketching out the basic design on the tank with chalk. Tom Richardson wandered over with his coffee. "You're really doing this." "I'm really doing this. Patricia is going to lose her mind." That's kind of the point. By noon, a small crowd had gathered. Miguel was a talented artist, and watching him work was genuinely interesting. He had started with a base coat and was now blocking in the basic colors. Even in its early stages, you could see the Grand Canyon taking shape on the curved surface of the tank. That's when Patricia showed up. I saw her car turn the corner and slow down as she spotted the crowd in my driveway. She parked on the street and marched over, her expression already twisted into disapproval before she even saw what Miguel was doing. "What is going on here? Lucas, what are you doing to that tank?" I turned to face her, keeping my voice pleasant. "I'm screening it from view, Patricia." "Isn't that what you wanted? Section 7, Paragraph 3 requires that utility equipment be screened. It doesn't specify how." She stared at the half-painted tank, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "This is not what that means, and you know it." "Actually, Patricia, I checked with the county zoning office. This is completely legal. It's my property, and I can decorate it however I want as long as the tank itself remains up to code," which it does. The HOA guidelines are more specific than county regulations. This is still a violation. "Is it, though?" Because I've been reviewing those guidelines and I can't find any record of the rule change you cited being properly voted on. Tom Richardson has been helping me look through the records, and there's no documentation of a meeting where such an amendment was approved. Patricia's face went red. That meeting was held. Just because you didn't attend doesn't mean it didn't happen. Then you should be able to provide minutes from that meeting, copies of the notices sent to all homeowners, and a record of the vote. I'd like to see those documents, please. Several neighbors who had been watching Miguel work were now watching our exchange with interest. Patricia noticed the audience and seemed to realize she was losing control of the situation. I'll be sending you an additional violation notice for this. And the board will be discussing your behavior at our next meeting. She turned on her heel and stalked back to her car. Tom waited until she was gone before he started laughing. "Oh man, Lucas, you've really done it now." "Good," I said. "I'm tired of rolling over for her made-up rules." Over the next week, Miguel transformed my propane tank into a work of art. The Grand Canyon mural was stunning, with layers of red and orange rock that seemed to glow in the afternoon sun. He added tiny details like birds in the sky and hikers on the canyon rim. When he finally stepped back to admire his completed work, a small crowd of neighbors and curious passers-by had gathered to watch him apply the final touches. But the painting was only the first phase of my plan. I had also commissioned a local metalworker to create a decorative frame around the base of the tank, designed to look like desert rocks and cacti. I installed landscape lighting that illuminated the mural at night, turning my side yard into a miniature art gallery. And I put up a small, tasteful sign that read Grand Canyon Propane, a symbol of HOA overreach, free viewing daily. The local media loved it. The first article appeared in the Arizona Republic 3 days after Miguel finished the mural. The headline read, "Phoenix Homeowner Turns HOA Dispute into Art Installation." The article included photos of the tank and quoted me talking about the absurdity of HOA regulations and the need for reform. It mentioned Patricia by name and noted that she had declined to comment for the story. The article went viral on social media. Suddenly, people were sharing photos of my propane tank on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. A local news station sent a crew to interview me for their evening broadcast. I stood in my driveway, explaining how the HOA had fined me for a tank that was partially hidden by a tree, and how I had decided to make it impossible to ignore instead. "So this is your way of protesting the HOA?" the reporter asked, a blonde woman named Jennifer who seemed genuinely entertained by the whole situation. "This is my way of complying with their demands while also making a statement about property rights and the need for reasonable regulations," I said. "I'm not violating any laws. I'm not being disrespectful to my neighbors. I'm just refusing to let a power-hungry HOA president tell me how to manage my own property within the bounds of actual, legal regulations." That broadcast aired the same evening, and by the next morning, my house had become a legitimate tourist attraction. People started showing up to take photos with the mural. Some of them knocked on my door to thank me for standing up to the HOA. Others just wanted to hear the story in person. I found myself giving impromptu tours of my side yard, explaining the situation to visitors from all over Phoenix and even some from out of state. Tom thought it was hilarious. "You've got people driving from Tucson to see your propane tank. This might be the greatest thing that's ever happened in this neighborhood." But not everyone was amused. Patricia sent me another violation notice, this time claiming that the lighting I had installed violated the neighborhood's regulations on outdoor illumination. I responded with a certified letter citing the specific section of the HOA guidelines that allowed for landscape lighting. along with copies of the receipts showing that the fixtures I had purchased were the exact brand and model recommended in the HOA's own approved vendor list. She tried again a week later, claiming that the increased foot traffic violated parking regulations. I responded with documentation showing that all visitors were parking legally on public streets or in my driveway, and that I had not received any complaints from the city about traffic issues. Each violation notice Patricia sent me was more desperate than the last, and each one I defeated with careful documentation and research. I started posting her violation notices on social media, redacting personal information, but showing the increasingly absurd claims she was making. The posts got thousands of shares, and the story kept growing. A travel blogger from California included my house on a list of weird roadside attractions in the Southwest. A photographer sold prints of the mural on Etsy, donating the proceeds to a charity that helped homeowners fight HOA disputes. Someone even made T-shirts with a cartoon version of my propane tank and the slogan, "Stand Your Ground Canyon." 3 weeks after Miguel finished the mural, I received a notice that the HOA board wanted to meet with me to discuss a resolution to the ongoing situation. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening at Patricia's house, which served as the unofficial HOA headquarters. I showed up with Tom Richardson, who had agreed to accompany me as a legal advisor. Patricia's living room was set up like a courtroom, with the 5 board members sitting behind a long table facing a single chair clearly meant for me. The other board members were people I recognized from the neighborhood but had never really spoken to. Robert Chen, a dentist who lived 2 streets over, Margaret Willis, a retired schoolteacher, David Ortega, who worked in real estate, and Susan Campbell, who ran a marketing firm. Patricia sat in the center, her expression stern as I took the defendant's chair. Tom stood beside me, his arms crossed. "Thank you for coming, Lucas," Patricia began, her voice dripping with false civility. "The board has been discussing the situation regarding your property, and we've come to some decisions." "I'm listening," I said. "First, we're prepared to waive the original fine of $75 if you agree to remove the mural and lighting from the propane tank and install a proper privacy fence to screen it from view." "No," I said simply. Patricia blinked. "Excuse me." "No. I'm not removing the mural, and I'm not building a fence. The mural is legal, the lighting is legal, and according to the actual HOA guidelines as originally written and properly approved, I'm not violating any legitimate rules." Robert Chen leaned forward. "Lucas, be reasonable. This has gotten out of hand. You have strangers coming to the neighborhood every day. It's disruptive." "I have people coming to look at art on my property," I corrected. "They're not trespassing. They're not causing problems. They're taking pictures and leaving. If anything, they're bringing positive attention to Sunset Ridge." Margaret Willis, the retired teacher, spoke up in a gentler tone. "We understand you're frustrated with the HOA process, and perhaps some mistakes were made in how the rule change was communicated. But can't we find a compromise here?" "I would love to find a compromise," I said. "Here's my proposal. The HOA formally acknowledges that the rule change Patricia cited was not properly approved, and you rescind all fines related to my propane tank. In exchange, I'll work with the board to develop reasonable screening requirements for utility equipment that actually make sense and don't involve arbitrary decisions by the president." Patricia's face went red again. "That's unacceptable. You're essentially asking us to admit that we were wrong." "You were wrong," Tom interjected. "I've reviewed the bylaws and the meeting records, Patricia. There's no documentation of the rule change you cited being properly voted on. That means Lucas was never actually in violation of any legitimate HOA requirement. You've been harassing him based on a rule that doesn't exist. The other board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Susan Campbell, the marketing executive, cleared her throat. Patricia, is this true? Was there a proper vote on the amendment? There was a meeting, Patricia insisted. In March of last year, we discussed several rule changes. I was at that meeting, Tom said. It was about landscape maintenance contracts. There was no vote on screening requirements for utility equipment. David Ortega, the real estate agent, pulled out his phone and started scrolling through something. I have the minutes from that meeting that you emailed to board members, Patricia. Tom's right. There's nothing in here about rule changes. Just a vote to renew our contract with Desert Bloom Landscaping. The room fell silent. Patricia looked trapped, her eyes darting between the other board members. I may have been mistaken about which meeting the vote occurred at, but the rule exists in the current version of the guidelines. A version you created without board approval, I said, which means it's not actually enforceable. Margaret Willis sighed. This is embarrassing. Lucas, on behalf of the board, I apologize. It seems we've been operating under incorrect information. So you'll rescind the fines? I asked. We'll need to have a formal vote, but I move that we rescind all fines related to Mr. Fletcher's propane tank and acknowledge that he was not in violation of any properly approved HOA guidelines. Margaret looked at the other board members. Do I have a second? Seconded, said Susan Campbell. The vote was 4-1, with only Patricia voting against it. She sat rigidly in her chair, clearly furious but unable to stop the decision. Thank you, I said, standing up. And just so we're clear, the mural stays. It's become an important symbol not just for me, but for a lot of people who are frustrated with HOA overreach. I'm not taking it down. I left the meeting feeling victorious, but I knew this wasn't over. Patricia was too proud and too stubborn to let this go without a fight. I was proven right 3 days later, when I received an email from someone named Brenda Morrison, who identified herself as an attorney representing the Sunset Ridge HOA. The email was full of legal jargon, but the basic message was clear. The HOA was considering legal action against me for damaging the reputation and property values of the community through negative media attention. I immediately forwarded the email to a lawyer friend of mine, Sarah Kim, who specialized in property law. She called me within an hour. Lucas, this is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever read. They're threatening to sue you because you exercised your First Amendment rights and talked to the media. Please tell me you want me to represent you, because I would love to destroy this case. How much is this going to cost me? For you? Nothing. If they're dumb enough to actually file this lawsuit, we'll countersue for harassment and legal fees. Trust me, they don't want this fight. I authorized Sarah to respond to the HOA's attorney on my behalf. Her letter was a masterpiece of legal writing, politely but firmly explaining all the ways that the HOA's threatened lawsuit was baseless and how my actions were protected by law. She also included a detailed list of Patricia's violations of proper HOA procedures and suggested that the board might want to reconsider its leadership before pursuing expensive and futile legal action. The HOA backed down. I never received any follow-up to the threatened lawsuit. But the story had taken on a life of its own at this point, beyond anyone's control. A documentary filmmaker from Los Angeles reached out to me about including my story in a film she was making about HOA disputes across America. I agreed to participate and spent a day being interviewed and filmed in front of my now famous propane tank. The filmmaker, whose name was Rachel Torres, was fascinated by how the situation had escalated. "What's interesting to me is that this started as such a small thing," she said as her crew set up for another shot. "A $75 fine. Most people would have just paid it and moved on. I probably would have too if it had been the first incident," I admitted. But it was part of a pattern. Patricia has been using these petty violations to assert control over the neighborhood, and nobody was pushing back. I got tired of it. And now you've inspired other people to push back too. Did you know there are at least a dozen other homeowners in Phoenix who have contacted local media about their own HOA disputes since your story went viral? I hadn't known that, but it made me feel good. Maybe something positive was coming out of this mess after all. The documentary wasn't the only media attention that kept coming. A reporter from a national magazine flew to Phoenix to interview me for a story about property rights and HOA reform. I found myself becoming an accidental activist, speaking to journalists about the need for better regulations on HOAs and more protections for homeowners. Meanwhile, the propane tank mural continued to attract visitors. I had initially thought the novelty would wear off after a few weeks, but if anything, the traffic increased. People started leaving small tokens of appreciation at the base of the tank, gifts and notes thanking me for standing up for property rights. I collected them all, eventually filling a box with dozens of letters and trinkets from strangers who saw themselves in my struggle. One letter particularly moved me. It was from an elderly woman in Florida who explained that her HOA had forced her to remove a memorial garden she had planted for her late husband because it violated landscaping guidelines. She had complied because she didn't know how to fight back, and she regretted it every day. "Thank you for showing people that we don't have to accept every arbitrary rule," she wrote. "Your propane tank gives me hope." 2 months after the mural was completed, I received an invitation to speak at a town hall meeting in Scottsdale about HOA reform. The meeting was organized by a state representative named Julia Martinez, who was drafting legislation to increase oversight of HOAs in Arizona and provide more protections for homeowners. I was nervous about public speaking, but I felt obligated to participate. The meeting was held in a community center, and I was surprised to see more than 100 people in attendance. Representative Martinez gave an opening speech about the need for reform, then invited several homeowners to share their experiences with problematic HOAs. When it was my turn, I stood at the podium and told the story of my propane tank, of Patricia's overreach, and of how refusing to back down had not only solved my problem, but had sparked a larger conversation. "The thing about HOAs," I said, "is that they're supposed to serve the community, not control it. They're supposed to maintain property values and resolve disputes, not create them. But when people like Patricia Henderson get into power and start using HOA rules as a weapon, someone has to stand up and say enough is enough." I was lucky because I had resources and support. But not everyone does, and that's why we need legislative reform to protect homeowners from abuse. The audience applauded, and after the meeting, several people came up to thank me and share their own HOA horror stories. Representative Martinez asked if I would be willing to testify when her bill came up for committee hearings. I agreed without hesitation. But the best moment of the evening came when I noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was Margaret Willis, the retired teacher from my HOA board. She approached me hesitantly. "Lucas, I wanted to apologize in person. I had no idea Patricia was acting unilaterally on so many things. Several of us on the board have been reviewing our records, and we've found multiple instances where she made decisions or sent violation notices without board approval. "What are you going to do about it?" I asked. "We're calling for a special election to remove her as president." "We already have the signatures we need from other homeowners. The vote will happen next month." I felt a surge of satisfaction. "Good. She shouldn't have that kind of power over people's lives." Margaret nodded. "And we want to rewrite the HOA guidelines from scratch, with input from the entire community this time. Would you be willing to serve on the committee that reviews and updates the rules?" I thought about it for a moment. The idea of volunteering more of my time to HOA business wasn't exactly appealing, but if I could help create a fairer system and prevent future Patricias from abusing their authority, maybe it was worth it. "Yeah," I said, "I'll help." The special election took place on a Saturday afternoon in early December. The neighborhood clubhouse was packed with residents who had come to vote. The ballot included not just the question of removing Patricia as president, but also a slate of new candidates for all board positions. Tom Richardson was running for treasurer. Susan Campbell, who had proven herself reasonable during the meeting where my fines were rescinded, was running for president. I cast my vote and stood outside watching as my neighbors filed in and out of the clubhouse. The energy was different than any previous HOA event I had attended. People were engaged, talking to each other about what they wanted to see change in the neighborhood. It felt like a real community for the first time since I had moved in. When the results were announced that evening, Patricia had been removed by a vote of 127 to 23. Susan Campbell was elected as the new president. Tom Richardson became treasurer. And the entire composition of the board had changed, filled with people who had committed to transparent governance and reasonable enforcement of rules. Patricia left the clubhouse immediately after the results were read, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. I actually felt a twinge of sympathy for her, but it faded quickly when I remembered all the stress and expense she had caused me and others in the neighborhood. The new board held its first meeting 2 weeks later, and I attended as part of the committee reviewing HOA guidelines. We spent 3 hours going through the existing rules, discussing which ones made sense, which ones were outdated, and which ones were simply exercises in control disguised as community standards. When we got to Section 7, Paragraph 3, the section about screening utility equipment, there was a lengthy debate. Some committee members wanted to keep the requirement but make it more flexible. Others wanted to eliminate it entirely. I proposed a compromise. What if we say that utility equipment should be screened when practical and aesthetic, but that creative solutions including art installations are acceptable? We could add language saying that homeowners can propose alternative screening methods for board approval, and that approval can't be unreasonably withheld. The committee agreed, and the new version of the rule was drafted to reflect that approach. It felt like a genuine victory, a way to maintain community standards without giving anyone the power to make arbitrary demands. Over the next few months, life in Sunset Ridge slowly returned to normal, but it was a better normal. The new HOA board operated transparently, sending regular updates to all homeowners and holding open meetings where residents could voice concerns. Violation notices became rare, and when they were issued, they were for legitimate issues with clear paths to compliance. My propane tank remained a tourist attraction, though the traffic decreased somewhat as the story faded from the news cycle. I didn't mind the occasional visitors. Some of them were genuinely interested in the art, and others just wanted to see the infamous tank that had sparked a neighborhood revolution. I kept the lights on and the mural maintained, a permanent reminder of what happens when ordinary people decide to push back against arbitrary authority. The documentary that Rachel Torres had been filming premiered at a film festival in Austin that spring. I flew out to attend the screening, which was nerve-wracking but also exciting. Seeing my story on a big screen, woven together with stories from other homeowners across the country, drove home how widespread the problem of HOA abuse really was. The film won an Audience Choice Award and was picked up by a streaming service, giving it an even wider audience. Representative Martinez's HOA reform bill passed the Arizona legislature in May and was signed into law by the governor. The law required HOAs to provide more transparency in their decision-making, established a state office where homeowners could file complaints about HOA violations of the law, and created penalties for HOA board members who acted outside their authority. It wasn't perfect, but it was a significant step forward. I was invited to the bill's signing ceremony, which felt surreal. Standing in the state capitol building, watching the governor put pen to paper on legislation that had been partly inspired by my fight over a propane tank, I felt a strange mixture of pride and disbelief. This whole thing had started because I was annoyed about a $75 fine. Now I was watching actual laws change. After the ceremony, I drove back to Phoenix and stopped at a local coffee shop. While I was waiting for my order, I overheard two women talking at a nearby table. "Did you see that story about the guy with the propane tank?" one of them asked. "The one who turned it into a tourist attraction." "Oh yeah, I drove by there a few weeks ago. It's actually really beautiful. I can't believe his HOA tried to fine him for it." "My HOA is just as bad. They sent me a notice last month about my garage door being the wrong shade of white." Like seriously, it's white. How many shades of white are there? You should fight it. Remember what that guy did. He didn't just pay the fine and move on. I smiled to myself and grabbed my coffee without introducing myself. That was the real victory, I thought. Not the laws or the media attention, but the fact that ordinary people were starting to question whether they had to accept every unreasonable demand from their HOAs. Summer arrived with the usual brutal Phoenix heat, and my life settled into a comfortable routine. I continued my work as a mechanical engineer, finished restoring my Mustang, and even started dating a woman named Hannah Miller, who I met at a community meeting about park improvements. She thought the whole propane tank saga was hilarious and impressive in equal measure. "So you're telling me you became famous for decorating a propane tank?" she asked on our third date, laughing into her wine glass. "I wouldn't say famous. Locally well-known, maybe. Lucas, I Googled you before our first date. There are like 100 articles about you and that tank." "You're definitely famous." I had to admit she had a point. The story had reached far beyond what I ever imagined possible. But what mattered most to me wasn't the fame or attention. It was the knowledge that I had stood up for myself, and in the process, helped other people find the courage to do the same. One afternoon in July, I was working in my garage when a car pulled up and a family got out. The parents looked to be in their 30s, with two young kids in tow. The father approached me nervously. "Excuse me, are you Lucas Fletcher?" "I am. Can I help you? We're visiting from Colorado and my wife wanted to see the famous propane tank. I hope that's okay, of course. It's right around the side of the house. Help yourselves." The family walked around to the side yard where the mural was visible. I heard the mother gasp with delight when she saw it. "Oh, it's even more beautiful than in the photos." I wiped my hands on a rag and joined them. The kids were staring at the mural with wide eyes, pointing at details in the painting. "How did you come up with this idea?" the mother asked me. I gave them the abbreviated version of the story, explaining about the HOA fine and my decision to turn a negative situation into something positive. The couple listened intently, nodding along. "That's inspiring," the father said. "We have HOA issues in our neighborhood too. Nothing as dramatic as this, but a lot of petty stuff that makes you wonder why you pay the fees every month." "My advice is to get involved," I told them. "Go to the meetings, read the bylaws, and don't be afraid to question things that don't make sense. HOAs only have as much power as we give them." They thanked me, took some photos, and headed back to their car. As I watched them drive away, I felt a sense of contentment that had nothing to do with revenge or vindication. I had turned a frustrating situation into something meaningful, and that felt good. The anniversary of the mural's completion came around in early August. Miguel suggested we throw a party to celebrate, and I agreed. We set it up as a neighborhood block party, getting approval from the city to close off the street for an afternoon. The new HOA board not only approved but helped sponsor the event, providing funds for food and entertainment. More than 200 people showed up. Neighbors I had never met before introduced themselves. Families brought their kids. Local artists set up booths to display their work. Miguel gave a talk about the creative process behind the mural and the importance of public art in communities. Tom Richardson manned a grill, cooking burgers and hot dogs while regaling anyone who would listen with stories about the old HOA regime. Susan Campbell, our new HOA president, gave a short speech thanking me for pushing the neighborhood toward positive change. "Lucas reminded us that rules should serve people, not the other way around," she said. "And he did it with creativity and persistence instead of anger. That's the kind of community member we should all aspire to be." I felt embarrassed by the praise but also grateful. A year ago, I had been frustrated and alone, facing down a petty tyrant with a clipboard. Now I was surrounded by a genuine community, one that had come together to support each other and push back against unreasonable authority. As the party wound down and the sun set over Phoenix, I stood beside my propane tank, admiring the way the landscape lights made the Grand Canyon mural glow in the darkness. Miguel walked over and stood beside me, a beer in his hand. "You know, this is probably my most famous work now," he said. "I've had 3 commissions from people who want similar installations. Apparently fighting your HOA with art is a growing trend." "I'm glad I could contribute to your career," I said with a laugh. "No, man. Thank you for letting me be part of this. It's not often you get to make something that actually matters to people." We stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the last few party guests mill around. "You ever regret it?" Miguel asked. "All the stress and conflict and legal threats?" I thought about the question seriously. The past year had been intense, full of anxiety and frustration and moments where I had wondered if I was making a huge mistake. But looking back on everything that had happened, all the changes that had rippled out from one simple act of defiance, I knew the answer. "No," I said. "I don't regret it at all." Life continued in Sunset Ridge, and slowly the story of my propane tank faded from the spotlight. The mural remained, weathering the harsh Arizona sun better than Miguel had predicted thanks to the high-quality paint and sealant he had used. It became a beloved neighborhood landmark, something that residents pointed out to guests and that new homeowners were told about when they moved in. Patricia Henderson moved out of the neighborhood 6 months after being removed as HOA president. I heard through the grapevine that she had bought a condo in Scottsdale where there was no HOA at all, which struck me as deeply ironic. I never spoke to her again after the special election, though I sometimes wondered if she had learned anything from the experience or if she still believed she had been right all along. The new HOA board continued to operate with transparency and fairness. Property values in Sunset Ridge actually increased, which undermined Patricia's old argument that my propane tank mural would hurt the neighborhood financially. Several real estate agents started mentioning the famous art installation in their listings, calling it a unique neighborhood feature that demonstrated our community's creativity and spirit. I testified at committee hearings twice more as Representative Martinez's office worked on additional legislation to protect homeowner rights. Each time, I shared my story and emphasized that reform wasn't about eliminating HOAs or removing all rules. It was about creating accountability and preventing abuse of power. The experience taught me that ordinary citizens could influence policy if they were willing to speak up and get involved. Hannah and I got engaged on Christmas Eve in front of the propane tank mural, which she insisted was the most romantic spot in Phoenix. I proposed with a ring I had designed myself, incorporating a tiny painted replica of the Grand Canyon mural in the band. She cried when I showed her the detail and said yes before I even finished asking the question. We were married the following summer in our backyard, with the propane tank serving as an unconventional but meaningful backdrop for the ceremony. Miguel designed floral arrangements that complemented the mural's color scheme. Tom Richardson officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. Susan Campbell brought a cake decorated to look like the layers of the Grand Canyon. It was perfect. 2 years after the mural was completed, a graduate student from Arizona State University contacted me about including my experience in her dissertation on grassroots resistance to corporate and quasi-governmental authority. She interviewed me for hours, digging into the strategic decisions I had made and the psychological factors that had motivated me to fight back instead of complying. Her analysis was fascinating, framing my actions within a larger context of citizen activism and civil disobedience. "What's interesting," she explained during one of our conversations, "is that you found a way to resist that was both creative and completely legal. You didn't break any rules. You just refused to accept an unjust interpretation of those rules, and you did it in a way that drew public attention to the issue. That's a template that other activists could learn from." I had never thought of myself as an activist, but I suppose she was right. I had taken a stand, used art and media to amplify my message, and ultimately changed the system that had been oppressing me and others. If that wasn't activism, what was? The documentary about HOA disputes won an Emmy for Outstanding Documentary Special the following year. Rachel Torres invited me to the ceremony, but I declined, feeling like I had already had enough time in the spotlight. I watched the broadcast from my couch with Hannah, eating popcorn and cheering when Rachel's name was announced as a winner. She thanked all the homeowners who had shared their stories in her acceptance speech, and I felt a warm glow of pride at having contributed to something important. 5 years after the original fine, Representative Martinez invited me to a press conference announcing that Arizona had become the first state in the nation to implement comprehensive HOA oversight legislation. The laws we had helped inspire had been refined and expanded, creating robust protections for homeowners while still allowing HOAs to function effectively. Other states were now looking at Arizona as a model for their own reform efforts. At the press conference, I stood beside homeowners whose stories had been even more dramatic than mine. People who had lost their homes to HOA foreclosures over tiny unpaid fines, who had been bankrupted by legal fees fighting unjust violations, who had suffered genuine hardship at the hands of power-hungry board members. My propane tank seemed trivial compared to their experiences, but Representative Martinez emphasized that every story mattered. "It's not about the size of the violation," she said. "It's about the principle that homeowners have rights, and those rights need to be protected." Lucas Fletcher's propane tank reminded us of that principle and inspired us to take action. We're all here today because he decided that a $75 fine was worth fighting. After the press conference, a reporter asked me if I had any advice for other homeowners dealing with difficult HOAs. I thought about everything I had learned over the past 5 years, all the mistakes and victories and unexpected consequences. "Document everything," I said. "Read your HOA's governing documents carefully. Know your rights. Don't be afraid to ask questions or push back when something doesn't seem right. And remember that you're not alone. There are thousands of homeowners dealing with the same issues, and when we support each other, we can create real change." The reporter scribbled notes, then asked one more question. "Would you do it all again? If you could go back to the day you received that first fine, would you still paint the propane tank?" I didn't even have to think about it. "Absolutely. That propane tank changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. It taught me about community, about standing up for what's right, and about the power of creative resistance. Plus, it's a pretty nice mural." Now, a decade after the original incident, life in Sunset Ridge is peaceful and boring in the best possible way. The HOA functions smoothly, handling actual problems like street maintenance and community landscaping without harassing homeowners over trivial violations. The neighborhood has attracted new residents who specifically chose Sunset Ridge because of its reputation for reasonable governance and community spirit. My propane tank mural has become a piece of local history. The paint has faded slightly despite regular touch-ups, giving it a weathered quality that somehow makes it more authentic. Tourists still occasionally stop by to take photos, though not in the numbers they once did. That's fine with me. The mural served its purpose, and now it's just a beautiful piece of art that happens to cover a propane tank. Hannah and I have 2 kids now, and they love hearing the story of how Daddy fought the HOA with a painting. Our daughter, who just turned 4, insists that the Grand Canyon is the most beautiful place in the world even though she has never actually been there. She only knows it from the mural beside our garage. We are planning a family trip to see the real thing next summer. I still serve on the HOA board, rotating through various positions over the years. It turns out I care about my community, which is something I never would have discovered if Patricia hadn't pushed me to fight back. The work is often tedious, reviewing budgets and contractor proposals and resident complaints, but it's also meaningful. I have a voice in how our neighborhood operates, and I use it to advocate for fairness and transparency. Miguel went on to become a successful public artist, creating murals and installations throughout Phoenix and beyond. He always credits the propane tank as his breakthrough project, the one that taught him how art could be a tool for social change. We still grab beers occasionally and reminisce about that week he spent painting in my driveway while neighbors and reporters gathered to watch. Tom Richardson passed away last year at the age of 78. At his funeral, dozens of people told stories about how he had helped them fight HOA battles or navigate legal disputes. He never stopped being an advocate for homeowners, right up until the end. In his will, he left me his collection of HOA documents and legal research, along with a note that said, "Keep fighting the good fight." I keep that note framed in my home office. Patricia Henderson, I learned through mutual acquaintances, eventually got involved in local politics in Scottsdale. She was elected to the city council, where apparently her detail-oriented nature and strong opinions are considered assets rather than liabilities. I hope she uses that position to help people rather than control them, but I honestly don't know. Our paths never crossed again after she moved out of Sunset Ridge. Looking back on everything that happened, I sometimes marvel at the chain of events that started with a single unjust fine. A propane tank became a mural, which became a symbol, which became a movement that changed laws and protected thousands of homeowners across Arizona. All because I decided I was tired of being pushed around. The lesson I learned, and the one I try to teach my kids, is that you don't have to accept every injustice. Sometimes the right response to a petty tyrant is not violence or anger, but creativity and persistence. Find a way to fight that's true to who you are, and don't give up when people tell you to just go along to get along. My propane tank will probably outlast me, which is a strange thought. Long after I'm gone, that mural will still be there, a quirky neighborhood landmark with a story attached. Future residents will walk by and wonder why someone painted the Grand Canyon on a propane tank. And maybe, if they're curious enough to ask, they'll learn about the fight for property rights and reasonable governance that started in a suburban Phoenix driveway on a hot summer day. That's a legacy I'm proud of. Not everyone gets to turn a $75 fine into lasting positive change. But I did, and every time I pull into my driveway and see that illuminated mural glowing in the desert darkness, I remember why it mattered to stand up and say no. The propane tank is still there, still beautiful, still serving its practical purpose while also serving as art and symbol and reminder. It's exactly what I wanted it to be. A tourist attraction, a conversation starter, and most importantly, a middle finger to anyone who thinks they can use arbitrary power to control other people's lives. And every single day, that makes me smile.